Awesome. Welcome, welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. And this is our third installment in the Strength and Unity series. My name is Luz, and I serve as the volunteer manager for We Are Ill. And we're just so happy you're here to join us today. Again, this space was created for us, by us. And whether you're newly diagnosed, undiagnosed, but suspicious, or a long-time driver, this is meant to be a space where everyone belongs. So really the goal of today is just to build community. Feel free to use the chat to ask questions, connect with others, and really it's just is meant to be a safe and welcoming space. So before we fully dive into the program, I want to, of course, make sure to take a moment to acknowledge the organization that brought us here today. We Are Ill. They're a nonprofit patient advocacy organization where it not only supports and uplifts women with autoimmune disorders like MS, but also NMOSD, lupus, and just really is the goal to redefining what sick looks like by making the chronic illness community more inclusive and really directly involving Black women such as, myself and others here, and we have specific initiatives centered around increasing visibility and access to patient care, research, education, and not only specifically to diversity in clinical trials, wellness education, but also self-advocacy and community. So some of the more notable events that offer include Wellness Weekend, which is a signature event that's in its sixth year this year. We also have things such as blogs from our influencers about how to live well in spite of MS. Also have a private Facebook community where we can hear from other Black women living with MS and even support community meetups across the country to help foster those stronger connections and meetups among folks. Oh, I want to take a moment to introduce my amazing moderators today, Dr. Hu Young. They are a board certified neurologist and fellowship trained specialist in neuroimmunology. She serves as the assistant director of Barrow Global and assistant professor of neurology at the Barrow Neurological Institute in Phoenix, Arizona. Dr. William earned her Doctor of Medicine from Indiana University School of Medicine and also serves as a member of We're Ill's board of directors. Her unwavering dedication to improving access and equity in neurological care is evident in her advocacy for diversity in clinical trials and her focus on addressing health disparities globally. By combining community engagement, compassion, and a patient-centered approach, she strives to deliver and promote exceptional neurological care regardless of her patient's circumstances and locations. So it will be a great honor to introduce her and take the stage.
Thank you so much, Luz, for that kind introduction. I'm so happy to be here tonight and looking forward to the conversation. So definitely make sure this is interactive. This isn't super formal. So we hope that we get to talk as much as possible with you all. And just a quick reminder before we get started, I wanted to make sure that you fill out the post-event survey so that you can qualify for the gift bags. So we want to make sure you guys get your gift bags for participating. So please fill out that post-event survey. That would be great. And so tonight we're really wanting to create that sense of community, and we want to honor the strength and the courage and the lived experiences of Black individuals that are navigating NMOSD. And we have some amazing people with us tonight. So we'll start with Marion Jones. Please tell us a little bit more about yourself.
Hi, everybody, and just a special thank you to the We Are Ill family for this opportunity. My name is Marion Jones. I actually live with NMO, neuromyelitis optica spectrum disorder. I was diagnosed during the height of COVID in November of 2020. Life came to a screeching halt for me during that time. And as a result of relapsing on a treatment drug, I was partially paralyzed, had to learn to walk again in 2021. Currently, I serve as an ambassador for the Smira Foundation. I've been doing that since 2023, just to challenge myself And as a way to teach myself that in spite of this disease, I can do hard things, I set out to run my first marathon in 2023. And now I have run 4 marathons and will be running my fifth marathon in a few weeks in Germany. I'm also working on a book that just captures my journey, and am looking to use that as a resource to help other people that are living with this disease. It can be, it has its highs and lows, lots of lows that we deal with sometimes in a silo. So that's why organizations like the Smire Foundation and We Are Ill are great, because they offer community. And so I just want to use my lived experience to help others. Particularly those who are newly diagnosed and are thinking, wow, what does this mean for my life going forward? And just want to be in a position to help encourage them on their own individual journey. I try and post as much as I can on Instagram and the social media platforms. And so feel free to follow me there. And if you are watching this and you're diagnosed recently, or if you've been living with a disease and I can ever be a resource, or if you have questions, I'm happy to always support and assist.
Thank you so much, Marion. I need to come train with you. I don't know how many miles I can run, but that is amazing. And next we have Nawandi Williams. And Nawandi, tell us a little bit more about yourself.
Sure. Hello, everyone. I am so happy to be here with you all today for the third session of this series. My name is Nawandi Williams. I am a licensed therapist, and I am also a Black woman living with multiple sclerosis. I was diagnosed November 18th, 2013, at the age of 23. I woke up one day and basically had no vision in my left eye. A few field tests and CTs later, it was discovered that I had a condition called optic neuritis, and that is what led to my MS diagnosis in 2013. So I've been rocking and rolling since then for the last, I guess, almost, what is that, 12 years now? And so I am just very happy to be here. Again, I'm also a licensed therapist who primarily works with Black women, navigating lots of systemic issues. We have a lot of unique experiences as Black women, especially when it comes to living with any kind of chronic illness. And so I'm very excited to pour into y'all today and for us to just have a really good time and talk about the mental health aspects of community within the context of living with a chronic illness.
Thank you, Nawandi, and it's so important. We tend to focus a lot on physical health and physical symptoms, but that mental health part is just as important. So I'm definitely excited to dive deeper into that with you tonight. And before we get going, again, this is really about connection, about empowerment, about community. And so hopefully, you feel seen and heard tonight. And as ladies mentioned, we are available to message us even after this is over, here to kind of help build or start building or continue building that community for you all. So don't be scared to reach out and send messages in the chat as the night goes on. And starting with that, we'll have our first drop in the chat here. And so if you don't mind putting, this word in, what's one word that describes what community means to you? And Nawandi and Marion, if you want to share your word of what community means to you, we can do that while we get some responses in the chat.
So I'll hop on and answer. For me, community is, I look at it as, if it's a second family, it's just a support system that I can lean on, that can lean on me as well. And, just a group of, individuals who understand the journey in whatever capacity that looks like. So That's sort of my definition of community. Hand it over to you, Nwandi.
Of course, of course. I two words come to mind when I think of community. I think of connection. We were never meant to do life alone. We're literally wired for connection and community down to like a biological level, and also refuge. So when I think about like needing we all as individuals, I think need and deserve like a covering from loved ones, um, just having people there who want the best for you and want to do right by you and invest in you and just be there for you and vice versa. So that's what I think of when I think of community.
Absolutely. And I see some words that have come into the chat: connection, tribe. Yes, having your tribe is so important. And then we have circle of people that truly understand you. And I think that's so important, especially when it comes to some of those invisible symptoms where you may look okay that day, but people that understand will know, okay, she needs a little extra love today, or he needs a little extra love today. So that is super important, to have those people that just get it, that you don't have to say much, but they do understand. Um, Awesome. So we'll get started here with just a little bit more discussion points. And these are questions that I'll pose to Marion and Mwandi, but please hop in the chat and let us know your thoughts, or if you have some comments to make as we go. And this question about community, Nwandi, kind of goes into my next question, which is, from a therapist perspective, what are some of the benefits of leaning on community, other than, versus than handling things solo?
Of course, of course. So when again, like I was saying before, we're wired for connection, right? And so I think a lot of times those of us who have been diagnosed or living with a chronic illness, our default is to isolate or withdraw. And there's research that supports that, isolation can be directly linked to, um, increased cognitive impairments, poor sleep quality, increased cardiovascular issues, all of the things, right? And so I think the benefits is to counteract that or combat that. Benefits of having community and leaning on community are an increased belonging, which can turn right or directly tied to increased self-worth, resilience, meaning, purpose, sense of purpose, all of the things that can definitely help offset some of the um, kind of inevitable anxiety and depression that does become associated with living with a chronic illness. So we don't necessarily want to dismiss those things, but we do want to put things into place that will help us kind of alleviate some of the shame that does come from living with a chronic illness. So let yourself be seen. I think there's power in being able to allow yourself to be seen in even some of your, for lack of better words, lower moments or most vulnerable moments. There's really a lot of power in allowing yourself to be seen in that way.
Absolutely.
Mhm.
And, you can drop a heart in the chat if you want, if you've ever felt like, you haven't been seen in some of those moments, or you have felt fatigued and tired and not really know how to articulate, that you just need a minute to recharge and regroup, and ask for help.
Mhm.
And Marion, what are some of those emotional moments or those mental hurdles that you've had to face that aren't as often talked about?
Okay, Doc, I did not bring my Kleenex with me. So I tried to get my makeup
Oh,
together for this presentation, but I'm gonna keep it real because I was actually having a moment before this session, and I was just like, it was just one of those days where things are heavy. And in complete transparency, I am one of those people that I'm very independent and I want to carry my whole load. I don't want to, overwhelm anybody else with what I'm going through. I work a full-time job. I have a very demanding role. I live in a state by myself for the most part. I don't, have a whole lot of family within arm's reach and things of that nature. And so, sometimes I do find myself like in isolation. And, there are times when, I've worked a full schedule. I have to get off of work because I'm training for marathon. So I have to get my runs in. And so I'm usually doing that by myself. And I don't feel like I have the energy to engage with people, even though I'm saying I just moved to Chicago and I want to meet people and I want to be social, but, my disease doesn't always allow me to live life in the way that I probably envisioned things prior to. And so that's why it's important to have community, but also a therapist, because I was thinking earlier, because of how I naturally don't, and I know this is not a good thing, I naturally don't like to talk about all the time, with someone else about what I'm going through because I know people are going through their own things. And especially those of us in the NMO community, is like, I definitely don't want to take anything to one of my NMO sisters because I know what their life experience is like already.
Mhm.
And so I was just saying earlier, I said, I need to get me a therapist again because I do know that I need to be talking to someone and I don't need to be, holding this,
Yeah,
and just in a silo.
yeah, and that's that.
Pause, girl, because I did not bring my Kleenex like I
And
said.
and that's that protective nature too, right? You want to protect the people that are around you that care for you, and you don't want to, put that burden on somebody else, but everybody needs help carrying a load sometimes. And so when you have that tribe, you have that circle, sometimes, if it's not them that you want to turn to, then yes, that therapist is like such an amazing resource. And Nawan, do you want to share just a little bit more about how that can be the perfect plug to add to your life? And as far as what are some of those resources, those tools that NMOSD patients can turn to?
Of course. So, of course, I'm always going to recommend therapy. Of course, as a therapist, but also as I have my own therapist, right? So none of us are immune to the complexities of this life that we live. And so, yeah, I think being able to have an objective ear and eyes, it's important, like having our family and our friends and our loved ones, absolutely. And I think there also is a place for, someone who can listen to you and offer feedback objectively as well. But even your therapist can be a part of your community. That relationship is a demonstration of community, of having people who can see you at any season of your life, right? And so, not only therapists, support groups, right? We Are Ill has support groups every year at Wellness Weekend, right? And Marion, maybe you can clarify on this. I'm still familiarizing myself with the Samira Foundation. I'm assuming you guys probably have support groups or encourage peer-led support groups as well. Get plugged into one of those, even if it's not like clinical mental health support, being in spaces where you are allowed to share your story, share the rawest, realest, I'm in the pits today story, right? Can we just let's be real, right? It's some days it's like, I can't talk to anybody unless it's somebody who knows exactly what I am going through, why I'm fatigued, why I can't get out of the bed, right? You also have, things like, drawing a blank, therapist directories, right? If you have like the resources where it's like sliding scale I'm totally losing my train of thought. Sliding scale, and low, what's the word? Low, not low income. Y'all know what I'm trying to say. Sliding scale options. I also just got my infusion like 3 hours ago, so I am tired, y'all. So forgive me if I'm just like, ooh. But yeah, so I'll just leave it at that. Therapy, and peer-led support groups, both great options, to kind of help you along that journey.
And someone also dropped in the chat, I call it spoon therapy for my family and my friends, etc. So yes, absolutely. How
Yeah, I
many
like that.
spoons are we given to this particular moment? How many do we have left in the day for the other things that we want to do? And Marion, you mentioned you had a day today. And what does that support system look like for you? Who do you go to right now? I know we're going to add on the therapist to this, but who is it now that you turn to, and who keeps you uplifted in some of those harder moments?
That's a good question. So I will say one of the strongest support groups for me right now is I have a prayer group that I meet with weekly. Every Friday we get together virtually, and we have like a powwow, like what's highs and lows. We talk about that during the week, and so that has been that's usually where I go to just offload and to seek support. Um, and I used to, when I was living in Massachusetts, I used to attend the calls, that the peer led calls that the Samira Foundation hosted. And those were beneficial in the way that the struggles that you're talking about that are linked to your disease, people on that call, they get it, you know.
Yeah.
They understand when you say, I was having a day, I'm fatigued, I'm tired, all the things, they understand it. It doesn't matter if you've never met this person, a day in your life, you can be in community with them and feel like, yes, someone hears me and they understand me. And usually I really don't share outside of people who have NMO or a chronic illness, because I often think they just wouldn't understand, so.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And Nawandi, how, before we move on from this particular segment, how can NMOSD patients navigate having those difficult conversations about their health with people who may not, also be diagnosed, or a part of their family and friend circle that wants to be there for them, but it may be hard to articulate what they want to say?
Mm. Yeah, of course. Navigating difficult conversations, I would say first, identifying your support, identifying your safe people. I think it's unrealistic for us to believe we have to go, share our story with everybody, right? Quality over quantity. If you just have two or three people who are like, this is my support, and deciding what parts of your journey you want to share ahead of time. You have the power to decide what you want to share and with who you want to share. I'm really big on using I statements, I feel, I know. I think that encourages us to take ownership over our journeys and our stories so that we can be able to convey what we want to our support. And I think that just kind of alleviates some of the anxiety that comes along with sharing this part of our lives. The anxiety will be there. It just will. And we can acknowledge that. Something that I remind myself of is, anxiety, you can be in the car. That's okay. You just can't be in the driver's seat. You got to get in the passenger seat. I'm driving this thing. I can acknowledge, I don't have to suppress you. I can acknowledge you and decide, even in this, I am going to share. I'm going to reach out for support. I'm going to show up for myself in the ways that I need. And that includes having the difficult conversations. And that also allows people the opportunity to show up for you as well. So that's kind of my advice, I guess, that I even try to take myself because it is difficult to talk about these things.
Absolutely. And, I like that analogy. You can be in the car, but you can't drive us around. So
You
we
cannot
got things to
drive.
do, we got places to be, so you can sit in the back seat
Yes.
until we address it. So, and I see the prompt there for the Q&A. Yes, please drop those questions. And here's another question for the chat too, before we get to a little bit of more of the educational piece. Have you found it easier or harder to talk about NMOSD with family and friends? And if you can share, comfortable sharing why or why not that is, please share that in the chat as well. I know that even for myself, when I see families coming in together, there would be some hesitancy too from partners, from, siblings, mothers, things like that, or children just wanting to be there and supportive, but not knowing what questions are triggering or, how to navigate even asking if somebody's okay because they don't want to make it sound like they're always asking them if they're okay or how they're doing. But it's important to be able to have that open communication where you allow family and friends to check in, even though you have your boundaries set and all of that. It's still healthy to allow people to care for you and show up for you, which is sometimes hard. And so I hope that today's conversation will make it a little bit easier, whether you're the family and friends wanting to check in or the person that's really going through the process and finding out how to navigate that. Yes. And so as we get some of those in, we'll come back to some of those responses as well. And we'll continue to address things as they pop up. So thank you guys for sharing. I know it may take some time to get some of those questions and comments into us as well. Nawandi, is there anything else you wanted to add to that dynamic or answer to this question?
I think just I think when I think of like, support, I think of like support systems have to be built. And I know that there'll be questions that I'll be asked that will kind of touch a little more on that later. But yeah, just recognizing the power of sharing and letting people show up for you. I think that's just the biggest piece of feedback I have for all of us. It's very difficult. It's very difficult. But again, like we said before, we are wired for connection. We're wired for community. It's critical, especially now, if we're being just absolutely honest. There's so much going on. And so we have to gift ourselves that and recognize that we are worthy and deserving of people showing up for us.
All right, so we can get started with a little bit more education. And so I have some key things that, we can go over that really every Black NMOC patient should really know. And the better that we understand what we're going through and what we're facing, the more empowered we are to be able to take some action as well. And before I dive deeper into that, thank you, Patricia. She mentioned that as a warrior of MS for more than 50 years, she has to continuously speak to herself that she's the driver and that she's at the head and not the tail. So yes, putting yourself first and knowing that you have the power to control where that journey goes for you. That's very, very important. So thank you, Patricia. And so going back to the clinical piece for NMOSD patients, we'll start kind of with just a little bit of a look of the history of NMOSD. And so it was originally recognized in the literature in 1894. And then a huge and pivotal moment was really the discovery of that aquaporin 4 antibody in 2004. And it was added to the diagnostic criteria in 2006. And so then, you know, the NMO spectrum disorder, that term really became more widely used in 2007. And then in 2019, we had that first FDA approved treatment for NMOSD. And I'll have a little bit more slides on treatment a bit down the road. And so when we're looking at really where does NMOSD fit in, it's a distinct condition. And I think that's the hardest thing to help patients and people understand, that it's not just a version of MS, but that this is its own distinct condition. And even though some of those things may look alike, and some of those symptoms may seem similar, it's really a different biology and a different thing that's happening with patients that have NMOSD versus MS. So unlike MS, NMO targets the astrocytes. So those are not the myelin producing cells that are mostly affected in MS patients. And so that the immune system is mistakenly targeting these water channel proteins. And this is why we have it affecting places where they're found, like the optic nerves, the spinal cord, brainstem, and you'll see a flow chart here in a bit to help explain that a little bit more. So when we see the vision loss, when we see the weakness, the nausea, all of those things are often specific, and they can be very severe and really debilitating. So those are the types of things that we see in NMO. And there can be, you know, transverse myelopathy that we can see as well. And so we should really be thinking of this more as a clinical syndrome and not just one event in isolation. So those are the kind of groups of symptoms that occur together that make us think about NMO. And so here we have that kind of description of some of the symptoms that you can see and that are more consistent with NMOSD. So bilateral optic neuritis, that's something that we can definitely see more severe brainstem involvement, and also those longitudinally extensive spinal cord lesions. And all that means, and we'll take a look at some imaging too, is that instead of just one segment of your cord being affected, we can see multiple segments kind of affected all the way down the cord. And that can cause you to be even more symptomatic because it's covering more area. So those are things that we can take a look at too. There can be balance issues from having lesions in the cerebellum or in the brainstem. And so we really take a look at all of that when we're trying to make that diagnosis, and including the titers that we send out for testing. Okay, so who all gets it and where is it happening, right? And so with NMO, it has a really strong female predominance, and about 70 to 90% of people diagnosed are women, typically around the ages of 35 to 45, but it can affect children and elderly as well. And while it's mostly sporadic disease, there's a small genetic component that we're still learning about as well. And we know that NMO tends to hit hardest in populations that are already facing healthcare system disparities and challenges. And so this includes our Black populations, our Afro-Caribbean populations, our Asian and Indigenous communities. We have such a large Indigenous community here in Arizona. And so this education is absolutely vital in those communities to be able to recognize those symptoms and those things, to go and see a doctor. It's really easy with some of these symptoms that are super vague. If you have numbness that comes and goes, or your hand is feeling tingly, I think we can all say that even in ourselves, we can brush that off and just say, oh, I'll get through it. I'll push through this. And sometimes it's even those little small moments that make a difference in the diagnosis. And so make sure that you know kind of what these things are, and then you can go in and get checked out and have an early diagnosis and early treatment, which is always better in these cases. And so we talk about, race and ethnicity and outcomes and things like that, as in regards to research, but it's important in real life. If we have a known disease that is presenting earlier and more severely in a specific population, it's so important to have targeted conversations and make sure that population is equipped with the information and the education they need to get better and see better trends within their own communities. So Black patients, for example, are more likely to experience aggressive attacks, particularly in the brain and the spinal cord. And yet we know that these outcomes are not necessarily worse because of biology, right? They're worse because of delays in diagnosis, of mislabeling, of misdiagnosis, mislabeling sometimes as MS, and sometimes limited access to the right treatments. If we're not getting a proper diagnosis, then we're not getting on the right medications. And that's why conversations like this and things that WeRL is doing to actually get that education out into the community is going to be so essential in making sure that people are getting healed in the proper way. All right, and so here we have a picture, and that's a picture of the cervical spinal cord. And so we can see lesions in there, we can see longitudinal lesions in there. And you can see that the lesion is a bit more central and elongated for more than 3 segments of the spinal cord. And you can see here on the side that in the diagram, you'll see that there's clinical presentation notes in there. So spasms, limb weakness, sensation loss, paralysis of, your hands or your legs, and then loss of bladder and bowel function. So that is really something that, people forget to ask about and mention. And that's something that can have a huge impact on somebody's quality of life. So don't be afraid to talk to your doctors about bowel and bladder control, and it can affect your work. It can affect the things that you do with your family. And there are plenty of options for treatment. And just because we know that this is an autoimmune condition that's causing these symptoms doesn't mean that it shouldn't be treated. And so we have to be able to advocate for ourselves and make sure that all of our symptoms are being addressed as a whole. All right, so I think the next slide talks about the vision issues in optic neuritis. And so you can experience vision loss. If it's not treated quickly, it can lead to blindness. And as you can see there in NMOSD, there are more severe attacks of optic neuritis that can be associated with it. So it's even more important to reach out to your healthcare team and get treated right away to protect as much of that vision as we can. In NMO, again, you can see more of that bilateral optic neuritis and not just the unilateral optic neuritis that we see with MS. So make sure you speak up and go get treated as quickly as you can when it comes to the vision. We want to protect that. And here we have some pretty unique features of NMOSD. I think you really don't see the hiccups as much in MS or the associated nausea and vomiting. And these tend to almost come as like 3 of the pair sometimes. So we want to take a look at specific areas of the brain, the area of postrema, and make sure that we're not seeing any lesions there that could make us think, hey, maybe we do need to go check for NMO in these patients. So make sure if you're feeling this or you have a family member or friend that's feeling this, that you bring this up with their doctor too. And so I think we've already started the conversation here talking about what it means to have your team, right? Your tribe. And that's the same thing when it comes to your care. It really takes a comprehensive healthcare team to be able to take care of everyone that has these diseases and these symptoms. That includes your therapist, it includes the pharmacist, it includes other specialists that are dealing with secondary effects like the bowel and the bladder. We can need a urologist or a GI specialist on board. And then our mental health professionals, super important to have there. And so even the social worker is getting involved in helping you navigate, what does this look like when I need to get job accommodations? What does it look like, when I need to be able to work from home a little bit more, or make a change in my policy to take care of me and my kids after this new diagnosis that I have. And so all of these people work together to make sure that you're having the best quality of life that you can. Because it's one thing to talk about disease progression and the right treatments from that side, but the day-to-day tune-ups that we need come from our comprehensive team. So it's super important to build that team for yourself, and get the help that you need. And I believe here we talk about just acute treatments. So very similarly to MS, we have high dose steroids that we can use versus plasma exchange, to help with treating an acute relapse of NMOSD, for example, with an optic neuritis. We would want to get those steroids on board quickly. Plex or plasma exchange is associated with improved visual acuity and visuals fields as well. And there's high risk for relapse with NMOSD. So we want to make sure that you're not just getting treated acutely, but we have the proper maintenance treatment for you as well. And so there's treatments for MS that have actually been documented to exacerbate NMOSD activity. And so this is even more of a sounding board to say we really want to make sure we have the right diagnosis. So if something feels off to you, your body the best, make sure you bring it up with your doctor and ask the questions of, is this really what's going on? Or should we look at something like an NMOSD? All right. And then for the long-term treatments, we have targeted options like eculizumab, satralizumab, and nebulizumab, sorry. And so these are all designed to help reduce those relapses. So we know what to do when we're in an active relapse, but how do we prevent these relapses from happening? And these are just some of the medications that go through with this. And so I won't read this whole slide off, but it's very important to kind of look at the options, look at the administration, looking at the side effects, and really see what works best for you, and what your options are, and having that conversation with the healthcare provider that you're seeing. All right, so what now? Really, we want to make sure that we're having conversations just like this, where we see that there's an under-recognized burden of MS in the Black community, but we have such a recognized burden of NMO and in the Black community. And so we need to make sure that we have support for further identification of education and peer-supported groups and family physicians and neurologists that are all aware of what this condition is and what it looks like, and that it's not being something that's bypassed for our Black patients. And so if you know a friend, tell a friend, you teach a friend, and support a friend in making sure that they know what questions to ask and bringing it up with their doctors. And, doctors go to school for a long time, but it's impossible to know everything. So feel that empowerment to actually bring something up that you think would be helpful for you, or your family member that may need that extra support. And we need more culturally competent care, right? So conversations like this being produced by the community for the community is so important. and making sure that we have that increase in diversity in clinical trials. That's going to be a huge thing that impacts us for making sure that we're included in the conversation that leads to the medications being made, that leads to the treatment options and the resources that are being made available. All right. So now with that being said, we're going to sound off in the chat again. If there was one thing that you wish your healthcare provider had explained about NMOSD just a little bit better, what would that be? And Marion, I guess we can open this up to you as well while we give some time for the chat. Just what's that one thing you wish you just understood a bit better with the diagnosis?
Yeah, so I'll have to say I was fortunate to be diagnosed within about 72 hours after my first visit to the ER. One of the things I wish my healthcare provider at the time would have explained better was what happens, some of the things that could happen on the other side of a relapse. So someone relapsing with NMOSD, and then also I wish I had more information about my treatment options in terms of really understanding, efficacy rates and, obviously when you're diagnosed, you have a number of things that are that are top of mind, and you really don't know what to ask, what questions to ask, what to think about. But if I could go back, those would be the two topics of conversation. I would want to know what treatment options are available, what are the efficacy rates, which basically just means like the chances of me relapsing or not. And I would want to know if for some reason I were to relapse, what does that mean? Because unfortunately, I was placed on a drug that at the time it was on one of the lower efficacy rate tiers. And I relapsed on that drug, and that relapse caused me to become partially paralyzed and set me back for an entire year. And I was basically relying on someone else. I lost my independence as a result of that. And so if I were to go back and I had more information around the treatment options, I would have advocated for a drug that had a higher efficacy rate, if that was an option for me.
Yeah, and I feel like it's just a whole new language, right? It's
Yes.
not words that you're used to even asking about,
Yes.
hearing. They may have even mentioned it slightly and gotten and brushed over it, but I always say, people like to nod a lot in the exam rooms, but then when I say, okay, what did you understand from that conversation?
Correct.
And then it's hard to articulate back. Then I know that I need to pivot and I need to explain it in a different way.
Right.
And really talk about that, because there's not a lot of other, conditions where they're talking to you about efficacy rates and study drugs and all of these things. So it's a lot to take in when you're hearing all of that. And so,
And it's a foreign language at the time,
it is. It's a
You're
very
just
foreign
hearing
language.
words. Yeah.
Absolutely. And so I think it's important to, if you hear something that you don't understand, you ask about it. If you go home and you read something and you hear some language in there that looks like it's important, but you're like, I don't really know what this means for me, but we didn't talk about this. And so go back and ask the question. That's what your healthcare team is for. And if you're running into walls trying to get your questions answered, please get a second opinion. Go out and find somebody that will take the time to answer your questions and really help you understand what you're going through and why you're on the medication and how good it works and what are the adverse effects of that medication. And so those visits take time. And in the beginning, each of your visits will take extra time. Don't feel like, I should know this already, or they already told me the name, I need to go on Google and all these other places to go find my answers. No, go back to your team and find those answers within that community. So don't feel like you can't ask those questions. All right, thank you, Marianne, for that. And so I think it's time for another part of our discussion here. And so we want to make sure that we are uplifting our voices and really feeling like we've shared some of those things that help to carry us through different parts of our journey. So feel free to drop questions in for the Q&A as well. And just remember, this is really the little mini lecture part is over. This is more of the conversation again. And so feel free to jump in whenever you guys have any thoughts on it. So Marion, we'll kind of stick with you for a second. What does self-advocacy look like for you when you're navigating these appointments? Now that you do have some of the vocabulary and the things behind you, what does that self-advocacy look like?
Now that I have my honorary medical degree,
Yeah.
now it's really, obviously we know hindsight is 2020, but it's just a lot of note taking. It's just like being in a course. This is a new course in our life. And until we really understand some of the terminology, a lot of it is just asking questions. And even before you know what questions to ask, it's preparing yourself for the meeting with your doctor or your neurology team. And so, just, doing some self-study. It really is like a class. It's saying, okay, these are the treatment options. What does this mean? And I would, I actually, it's funny because one of my current neurologists, before I moved to Chicago, I wanted to meet with him and, find out if that would be a good fit for me. And, I said to him, I said, Dr. Miravalli, can you just explain to me what is this disease doing in my body? And he literally took out a sheet of paper and started to write, like, here's the spinal cord and these are water channels and all of the things, and just took that time out. But again, it's, I come to my neurologist, basic question like that, like, can you break this down for me? If I were a fifth grader, how would you explain this to me? And so sometimes it's just getting the doctors to simplify it so that you can really understand what's happening with your body, so that so that these things start to make sense. And so in order for me to advocate for myself, I need to know things in that simple language, as simplified as possible. And self-advocacy also looks like, these communities like We Are Ill and the Smire Foundation, you know bouncing some of these questions off in those community groups, because you'll find out, you may have a question about something and someone else in that group has already had that experience. So they may be able to provide some education to you or insight, etc. So that's why those communities are equally important as well. But self-advocacy is just doing some research, getting into that my chart, getting off of Instagram for a little while and getting into that my chart and figuring out, oh, what did my last MRI, what was that? And then asking them, okay, this said that, I did Google it. I know I probably didn't get, the right information, but can you explain that to me? So, I've gotten to that point where when I have my MRI check-ins, I can go online and I know that things are stable. And now I'm not anxiety prone until the next time I meet with my neurologist to get them to kind of give me, to really like read the results to me, if you will.
Right.
So yeah, so it's just educating yourself, and whatever education resources and tools that are available to you, utilize all of them.
Absolutely. Yeah. Some people laugh at my little stick figures, but they do the job sometimes. And Nawandi, Marion brought up these tools. How would you recommend that, patients prepare for meetings with their neurologists or their specialists, their therapists, so that their voice is heard, especially when they're feeling anxious and some of that anxiety from the lack of understanding, maybe?
Yeah, so for Marion just really summed up the question for me, honestly, because when you were talking about, I think we have to go back to the importance of finding ourselves in these communities, because in order to combat a lot of that anxiety is education, like Marion just said. If there's something you don't understand, ask the question, whether it's your neurologist or if you can't see ask your neurologist right then and there. Ask one of your peers who have had a similar experience. Marion, you speaking about like asking about like the efficacy rate helped me. I was like, I've never asked that question before. If I'm being honest, I've just been very blessed that the medications I have had have worked, but I didn't ask. So even just right then, I was like, oh, okay. But again, I'm in a space with people who have similar lived experiences. So I just wanted to point that out, like live demonstration right there, y'all. But I'm a huge advocate for tracking your symptoms. So, a lot of times when we go into these appointments, we're being asked, what have you experienced? What symptoms have you experienced? And a lot of times it's like, I don't know. I've just been like I'm in pain or my muscles are weakening. I don't know. And so now I have gotten into the habit of, when I do have a hand tremor, I write it down, the date, even the time of day. Um, I told my neurologist earlier this morning, I was like, I'm having a lot of headaches recently and a lot of nerve pain in my back. And so being able to have that conversation with her, we're able to troubleshoot. So again, educating yourself and noticing things in your own body so that you can help your neurologist help you or help your team help you, help your therapist help you. And again, education, education, education. Another thing that I advise people to do if they can is to bring a support person to these appointments with them. It can get very overwhelming with the questions you're trying to remember. Make sure that you're telling, everything that's going on with you to your neurologist. Having someone who may be privy to some of your journey or have witnessed some of your journey to come along with you. It just helps to have a second set of eyes and ears. They may think of a question that you just forgot about, or they might catch something, or hey, Nawandi, remember you wanted to talk to her about this. Oh, okay. Well, yeah, let's ask. Again, because of the anxiety, it can be very overwhelming. And so having someone to speak up for you when and if you can't for whatever reason, I think is very critical. So, yeah, having your support system and tracking your symptoms if you can, I think are two really great tools. And education. Educate yourself.
And the
Absolutely.
one you actually brought up a great point about, and especially in the early days of diagnosis, because you just don't know what questions to ask. You don't know what you don't know. Fortunately, a couple of my early visits and even the day that I was diagnosed, I had a friend that was with me. And it was so interesting because he's very nerdy. So he actually went home and started to research NMO and said, I think this is the infusion drug you need to be on because it has, he probably said a higher efficacy because at the time I didn't know what any of that was. I was just trying,
Mhm.
I just wanted to know, am I going to live through this thing?
Mhm.
That was top of mind for me. But it's so interesting because now he and I will have just conversations about the early days of, 2020 and all of that. And we go back to that conversation and I say, the drug that I ended up getting on after I relapsed was the drug that he,
Wow.
sort of, not wanting to push because this was all new to him and it was new to me, and he didn't want to step over, any of the doctor's recommendations and things of that nature. But that just speaks to your point of having someone else that isn't probably dealing with the emotions from it in the way that you are as a patient, and that can also be a second ear. So that's, yeah, really.
Yeah,
Yes.
and I think it's important to also kind of understand what the severity of some of these relapses and what that can cause. Because maybe when something minor is found, it's like the medications sound like the big bad and scary, and the treatments sound like the big bad and scary, but we don't have a clear idea of what it would mean to have a relapse that can really, present with a lot of disability, whether that's physical, mental, emotional. And so I think just really understanding what could happen with a relapse and understanding what the medications do to help prevent them is really important too, because all medications and all treatments out there come with their own risk and their own side effects. But once we understand what they do to protect us and help us have the quality of life that we want, I think people may have a different perspective on starting treatment, by not just being told, okay, here, this is what you need. It's like, no, here, this is what you need, and this is why I think you need it, and why I think it would be helpful. So your friend, doing the research thought, like, I think this would be helpful, but in that moment, he didn't have that voice to go and say that to the doctors at the time. And so hopefully, with today's conversation, you guys can feel empowered to have that conversation, to ask the question like, well, I think this may be better for me. Can you tell me why you would not want to use this medication for me? And really make sure you get a good answer to that, right? If it's just like, well, I don't think so, that might be a time to question, them a little bit more on that, right? And really understand why they're recommending to you what they're recommending to you. And that's your right as a patient to have those questions answered. And in moments when it feels like the medical system can't really relate to your experience, how do you reclaim that power? We talk about just the interaction with you and your provider, but we know that there's systemically a lot of things that could be better. And so how do you reclaim your power in those instances? And either of you can start. Nawandi, if you want to start.
Being bold. To simply put, like you said, there's a lot of systemic issues that are at play here, especially if we're just being totally honest when it comes to being a Black woman. We have self-advocacy is critical. And so I think that we really have to be strategic in making sure that we are getting things documented, that we're asking the right questions. If we don't have the right questions to ask, talk to people, again, like we said, with similar lived experiences so we know what questions to ask. Like Marion said earlier, I need to see that documentation, lab results. I'm in my chart all the time. um, Making sure that you're getting those clinical summaries and just being very upfront, I think, and being able to, when we talk about reclamation, I think that's a part of it, being able to advocate for what we need. But in order to do that, we have to know what we need, right? And so yeah, I just think it's very important that us as Black women, other women of color, we have to learn to be bold. And I think that speaks again to the power of community so that you can be empowered to be louder and prouder, honestly and truly. I think we're just in a space where we just have to. And if I'm being totally honest, I think it's a little unfortunate that we have to be so, like, but that's just kind of where we are. Ground yourself before you go into these appointments. Prep yourself. If pray, meditate, do some kind of grounding activity so that you can go in with the soundest of mind and so you can be better able to advocate for yourself in these meetings or appointments. I hope that answered your question. Sometimes I can be,
Yes, it did.
I'll be,
Yes,
oh my.
ma'am.
Yeah, I was just gonna also add to that. We talk about, the systemic issues that exist, and, how some of these things are linked to policies that are in place. And so just as a patient advocate, I'm always looking for ways to, be a part of these efforts where we're going to Capitol Hill and we're talking to our elected officials and these policymakers about issues that impact individuals living with rare disease and chronic illnesses and things of that nature, and talking to them about, these insurance challenges that, are continuing to be problematic for us, or whatever those issues are. I think being involved and making sure that we have a voice at the policy level is extremely important. And so, that's also a space where I try to, put my energy toward as well. Yeah. Because I think, just as an example, one of the drugs that I take in addition to the infusion is for nerve pain is Lyrica. And Lyrica happens to be a controlled substance. And so I think that I went to Walgreens to pick up my prescription once, and they said that they were out, and it was around the time that I was also out, and I need my Lyrica. It is at that level. My nerve pain will flare. And so I asked if they could just call it in at another, location, and I could just go pick it up there, and they could not do that.
Mhm.
And I said, well, why? Because it's still, I'm going to pick it up from that location just because you're out of it. And so I think that issue, someone created that, said, hey, this is the process. This is the way that we're going to do that. And so sometimes these processes need to be revisited, because somebody probably created that who never had to use Lyrica, never needed it for nerve pain, never knew the severity of what it means to be without it from a patient perspective. And so just figuring out who makes those types of decisions and making sure that patient-centered voices are right at the table, helping to create those policies for the Walgreens or policies at the state level, for hospitals and things of that nature. And so I would like to see more of our voices contributing in that way.
Yes, and I'm so glad you brought that up because, a lot of people right now in this current environment want to tune out the politics and tune out the policies. But this is really the time to be involved in that because decisions will get made for you without you. And so as tiring or exhausting that may be, having that seat at the table, someone with your voice, Marion and Nawandi, having that information being shared with people that are making those policies is
Mhm.
tremendous because then we know that a patient was at the table. Somebody spoke up from the patient perspective and not just from a provider or a payer or somebody else that, or the MBAs that are in the room thinking about the business aspect. Like, no, we're talking about the people that are truly benefiting and what this policy and the people that the policy is going to impact. So that's huge. And even if you can't be there in person and you have somebody that is going to be that voice, that patient voice, support them, send them the message, send that thank you for going to that meeting today because it means the most for the entire community. And that kind of leads me to my next question, which is, when that advocating and that self-advocating and advocating for other patients becomes exhausting, right? It's a lot of internal strength that it takes to not only think about yourself, but think about others that are going through a similar life experience. What are some of the self-care things and practices that help you recharge so that you can keep showing up for yourself and others? And so, Nawandi, I'll start with you. Maybe even share some tools, some mental health tools that people can use to recharge.
Yeah. Um, Therapy. Again, finding your own therapist or mental health professional. This work living with a chronic illness and advocating for those who are in your community it's just exhausting. It can be very tiring. And so making sure that we have a space to unload, it's kind of like taking care of you so you can continue to take care of others. But you have to take care of you first. Otherwise, I know we've all heard the saying, you can't pour from an empty cup. There's nothing there. So you have to go refuel, and that's okay. I remind myself that rest is our birthright. This is not an afterthought. This is something that we need to do, that is crucial for our minds and bodies. We have to learn how to rest. And I'm not talking about just sleep, right? Like learning how to really rest in our bodies and make sure that we are, again, refueling and restoring for ourselves first. And so that from that place, we can go and continue to pour out into our own communities. So, yeah, finding a therapist and learning how to rest. Also, scheduling in some joy. I
Yeah.
know that might not sound like super therapeutic, but joy, like just like we schedule the meetings, just like we schedule the pickups. What are you doing to refuel your spirit?
Yeah.
You know, and so making sure that we are, finding hobbies, hanging out with our people, and just pouring into ourselves, I think is how we can help address the fatigue and the heaviness that comes along with advocating for ourselves and others.
What about you, Marion?
Use those frequent flyer miles, book that trip, get that vacation in. It is always just an avenue for just self-therapy for me. I will book a flight to a place I have never been and go solo and just, be with myself and move at my own pace. And that's one of the things that's really helpful. Um, Right after this call, I am headed to the massage spa because I need a little TLC just to get the stress out of my, the stress nodules and all of that. And so that's another way that I just rest and recharge. And then also, sometimes for me, it's just, locking myself in my place and just sleeping and getting just, some rest and, just being in the quiet. And that's helpful as well. And then obviously, when I can take a trip, back home to Mississippi where lots of my family lives, getting around my younger nieces, particularly the 4-year-olds, and and just absorbing their energy and all the hugs, get all the hugs and all of that. I have been contemplating getting a golden doodle. However, I just don't know if I can keep up with it because I got to take care of the dog and then take care of me. And it might be a situation. So I do not want to neglect any pets, but I do, I am sensing how a golden doodle might be part of a just very therapeutic, you know. So if anybody out there has a golden doodle and you're in Chicago and you want me to dog sit, maybe we can kind of work something out. So that I would love. I do think like a little pet, pets are therapeutic as well. So
Pet therapy is a real thing. And, when I'm in the hospital, I get excited when I see the pet therapist. So it
right.
definitely has this soothing effect and just kind of tranquility about something, with life showing you love. And sometimes that's all you need, just a little snuggle.
Yeah. Right.
And so that's interesting. I was thinking about that too. I'm not a big pet person, but they're so cute. And I might think about
Cuddly.
it. So I'm gonna follow up with you on that, Marion, once you find somebody to dog
Yeah,
sit their golden
exactly.
doodle.
See how we all like it made us all smile. We are even just talking about it. It's like, oh, the dog, they're so cute. And then
Exactly.
I have a friend, she was on here. I don't know if she's still on here. She was on here earlier, but she's a dog mom and she throws the parties at the park. And I kind of feel left out a little bit, just, not having a dog to take over there. So we'll see.
Absolutely. So we'll find out. Stay tuned. Maybe in part 4, we'll
Exactly.
hear about the golden doodle.
Exactly.
But thank you, ladies, for this great conversation. And I do want to make sure that we have some time to just highlight some takeaways that we want people to leave this conversation with. So I'll definitely start and I'll have you guys add in as well. But I think it's important to just recognize that we want you to build and lean into your community. We want to be a part of your community. So please reach out to us, reach out to the We Are Ill team, and your other participants here. And then also just make sure that, you know, you advocate for your care. Advocate for your care like your life depends on it, because truly it does. It depends on what you get access to. The knowledge that you have is truly power in making sure that your journey is what you want it to look like and that you have a good quality of life. And like Marian mentioned, invest in that total wellness, you know, get the massages, get the mental health, get all of the things that bring you joy. I think that was a wonderful word that Nwandi mentioned, because I think when we're just so used to the things that we do and our day to day becomes so routine, we forget sometimes to add in that sprinkle of joy. And that's such a big part of your happiness, and your well being and that total wellness. So those were my tidbits that I kind of wanted to remind everybody about. And I will open it up to Nawandi, and Marian as well to share some of their takeaways that they have from tonight.
I love Dr. Hume that you just said, like our life depends on it. Because in my notes, I literally have like our health depends on, or is contingent upon our openness to connect. Um, quite literally, you guys. Being in community saves lives. And so I guess my biggest takeaway that I want to remind you guys of is you guys have the power to own your story. As difficult and as scary as that can be, reclaim your story. You get to choose your health team. You get to choose how you show up. You get to choose how you advocate. Surround yourself with people who empower you to do so, and you can empower them to do the same. There's power in numbers. And so when we rally together, we see great things can happen. And so just really gift yourselves with that, because you are absolutely worthy and deserving of those things. So, I love y'all.
Thanks, Nwandi.
You're welcome.
I just see in the comments, Keena said it truly takes a village, and Keena's mom said, I have a miniature schnauzer that has really enriched my life. I take her everywhere, and she does, and she is so well mannered and just like the perfect companion. I'll just add that, you know, making sure that even after this session, you just start to think about where are the places I can go to find community? Like, who are those people? Like, write it down so that in times of need, you know, hey, this is the community, this is the individual I can reach out to, or these are the people that I can, you know, send a message to in a group chat or something like that. And just, and knowing that, you know, because we need that, you know, especially after, you know, like I said, like after a long day of work, you just want to exhale with some people that kind of understand your lived experience on the other side of just being a working professional, especially if you're living with a chronic illness. And it is therapeutic, because even just being on this call with me today has been therapeutic. I feel so much better than I did when I first got on the call, you know, having just had a long day. And then I think the other takeaway is just, you know, making sure that you're always listening to your body. When I relapsed and was paralyzed and was in the rehabilitation facility, one of the things that the neurologist said to me, you know, she said, in order for you to really prevent, you know, a relapse, you want to make sure that you focus on three things. One of those things was just rest, you know, getting the proper amount of rest. The other thing was just nutrition and hydration, you know, making sure that, you know, just you gave the body the nourishment that it needs. And the third thing was stress reduction, which just that kind of links to just like the mental health piece. And I always think about those three things. I'm not perfect at, doing what I need to do because I definitely need more sleep. I need to focus more on my nutrition. And I definitely could benefit from just, thinking about mental health and but those three things are always top of mind. So, I know I'm just like, okay, Mary, how's your nutrition? How is your mental health and things of that nature. So just making sure you're always listening to your body because your body will tell you exactly what it needs.
Absolutely. Thank you, Marianne. And we do have one last chat prompt left. What is one action that you plan to take after this webinar? And I'll start with myself as people want to write their responses in the chat. I think for me, I definitely want to make sure that I'm communicating better when I'm talking to my patients. I want to make sure that I have these resources readily available for We Are Ill and these other types of support groups that are so important for Black women, and making sure that I can be maybe a catalyst for community building and making sure that we have the capacity to do that where I'm at. So I know that was more than one thing, but we're gonna do it all after we leave this webinar tonight. So we'll let Marian and Awandi share as we get some more answers in the chat.
Well, I am going to take Marion's advice and book another trip. Um, Traveling, that is what I definitely want to take care of my own mental health. And that is one of the ways that I do. I also I think something else I really want to do is get in touch with some of my safety support and just kind of update them on how I'm doing. So again, like you were just saying, like making sure we're conveying our needs, so that the people around us can know how to show up for us. And so I think that's what I want to be intentional about doing moving forward, is making sure that I'm giving my people all of the tools they need to help and support me as well. So I think that's what I'll do. And get ready for Wellness Weekend.
Oh, yes. I hope I
Yeah.
see everybody at Wellness Weekend. We will be
Yes.
there. I'm so excited. And Tressa mentioned hydrate more, rest more. Yes, definitely. I feel like I hear a lot of people feel really guilty about just turning off and taking a nap. I mean, everybody needs a good nap in the day sometimes, whether you have a chronic illness or not. So please don't feel that guilt of, I should be working, I should be hustling, I should be doing this, because sometimes your body will just let you know that you need a break. And so resting and hydrating, especially in places like where I'm at in Arizona, where we reach 118 degrees, is so important for your body to stay doing its thing throughout the day. So make sure you get that rest. Thank you for sharing that. And you'll see in the chat that we dropped the link where you can sign up for Wellness Weekend. It's going to be from November 7th to 9th in Atlanta, Georgia. And I will be there, and Awandi will be there. So thank you so much for joining us tonight. And also don't forget about those post-event surveys, so that you can get your branded boxes, gift boxes. So please help us out and do those surveys, which should be pretty quick. So I appreciate your time. As always, thank you, Nwandi and Marian, for everything that you do. And thank you for joining us tonight, everybody. And before we go, were there any questions in the Q&A chat? I want to make sure we answer those before we go. Let me just take a look. Okay.
While we're waiting on questions, I just want to shout out a couple of people.
Yes.
David has NMO, and it's just rare that we have males join us in our circles, but we're connected on social media, and he's joining in from Germany. So just shout out to David. Thanks for coming, David. I see some of my NMO sisters in the crowd always. Kayla and Keena, and then Keena's mom, who has MS, is also here. I think I have a cousin that was on earlier, Tressa. So just a little shout out there. Thank you all for joining us. And I also hope to see you in Atlanta, because I will be there for Wellness Weekend also. So make sure you hit that link that's in the chat.
Thank you, Marion. Yes, thank you guys so much for coming, and reach out before Wellness Weekend, after Wellness Weekend, during Wellness Weekend. We don't bite, so make sure you come up and say hi and remind us where we met before. So I appreciate you all. Have a good rest of your night, everybody.